Mike Sullivan. I was the head of programming at the UPN network.
And I'm Larry Hertzog, and I'm the creator, executive producer of the series.
When I met Larry, it was so late. It might have been February or March.
Oh, it was late, yeah.
It was way beyond the point where you'd normally be picking up a show. But we were looking for different genres or different kinds of shows that might give us a way of sparking that kind of cult attention that we could use to grow on. Because we didn't need the kind of numbers that ER was getting. We didn't need to be up at that level. It'd be great if you could. But you weren't going to get there with these stations.
It's hard when you have to put the coat hanger in the TV to watch it.
Well, that's actually a very germane point, because at that time, cable penetration in the country, I think, was about 2/3 of the country, and a lot of people with these UHF channels did have to monkey with that antenna. And if you're going to start monkeying with that coat hanger, you've got to be motivated. Larry's agent, Jeff Benson, had sent me a couple of scripts. One of them I don't remember now. The other was very unusual, very vivid. It was a pilot Larry had written for someone. It was about, as I recall, a psychiatrist who could enter other people's dreams. Maybe he wasn't.
Well, their minds, and it wasn't a psychiatrist. It was called Inside Out.
Yeah, and it was very fresh and very different. And you look at Hardcastle McCormick and Heart to Heart, and you don't necessarily get to this pilot script. But I often had seen over the years that someone's credits didn't necessarily tell you what their individual passions or visions as a writer might be. So that script, even though it wasn't something I thought that would be right for UPN, made me interested in meeting with Larry.
So I assumed, of course, I was going over there to talk about Inside Out, this Fox pilot I had written. And I went over and met Mike, and I think we probably devoted about 30 seconds to Inside Out. And Mike said, before we talk about that, he said, you could do your dream show, anything you wanted to do, whatever you wanted, but would never pitch it because you would think you'd be laughed out of the room or escorted out of the room. What would you pitch? Now, this was a great question. I mean, I'm sure I was being set up for something, but it was a great question. And I distinctly remember not having an answer. I don't know if Mike knew that, but suddenly you're being asked the question you always wish someone would ask you, and you have no answer. And it's not happening. And for some reason, while I was stammering through the television history, Mike said, did you ever see a show called The Prisoner? And I said, did I ever see it? I said, probably my favorite show ever. And he said, well, would you like to do something like that? And I said, are you crazy? And I thought, yeah, I mean, I'd love to do that. And he said, okay, I'll call Jeff Benson. We'll make a deal. Go home and think of something.
It seemed to me that one of the ways to get exciting, fresh kind of shows was to try and tap into the creators' passions in a way that maybe they hadn't had an opportunity to do in more standard genres at bigger networks.
And then Mike and I would actually have a few discussions, because I'd go in and say, well, here, because again, this was fast, so I'd have to get with Mike and say, well, I'm kind of thinking of this and making him this, and I thought if he was a photographer, and as elements were kind of coming into my head, I would discuss them with Mike because we needed to have something ready quickly. And Mike would start asking me all these intellectual questions. I mean, I remember him saying to me, well, why, and this was before the script existed, is this experience that our character is being put through, is it because he needs to learn? Is it because he thinks he doesn't? And you remember those discussions? Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, who is this guy? I once heard someone say that with a lot of musicians and composers, that their first album is the best because they had all those years building up to it. And then there's only 18 months before their next one. And this was my first album. It wasn't my first job or my first show, but it was the first time someone said, go do what you love the most to do. I think unexpectedly, although again, Mike can talk more about this, I don't think anyone expected a show like Nowhere Man from a new network, from UPN. I think they expected them to take a lower road.
They thought it was going to be more of that first-run syndication kind of product, and we very definitely wanted to get some things that looked network. So we made a deal with Dick Wolf. We had Leonard Nimoy working on a project, and we wanted to raise the bar, especially in drama, for what might have been seen on these stations previously. When you're plunging into the deep end of a whole different pool, like we were with this show, it's not a cop, it's not a doctor, it's not a lawyer, it doesn't even have the patina of the perhaps former secret agent the prisoner had. So in other words, it's not a hero from one of the classic enforcement genres where, you know, this guy gets into a pinch, if he gets a gun in his hands, he knows how to use it. Don't have that.
It's always interesting to me, and I'm sure this will come up. You know, things take a life of its own after you've written it, and people, for believing something, you know, as the writer, you can't go out and say, you're wrong. I mean, you just wrote it. It's now a baby out in the world. Because you mentioned the end there, and I've always had my feeling about that whole last act of the show in Iowa. Mm-hmm. You know, and it was, when I was writing it, I believed that his mother was sick, that the Father Carney, the priest, had died of a heart attack, and that the guy at the end in the car at the crossroads was just a guy in a car. Tom was at a place emotionally where he was so shaken that he didn't know what he could believe in terms of when you talk about his own mother denying him in the scene with Megan.
You know, my mother wouldn't come out for my funeral.
And Tobe Hooper did a really nifty thing in how he directed the pilot. No razzle-dazzle. No jumping camera around and exotic angles, not even to the degree Hitchcock would do to depict similar kinds of dislocation that a hero's experiencing. Outside of one shot there in the phone booth early on, when the camera comes around, he's very straightforward. Again, it's almost like a visual equivalent of Kafka's prose style. It's deadpan. And this is a few months after ER is premiered and has accelerated TV drama in a very exciting way, or like the gurneys are almost like the car chases in the old detective shows. It's moving much faster, page-and-a-half scenes, steady cams, whipping things around. Nowhere Man by the last act is assumed this almost meditative quality.
And it's almost, in a way, I mean, I don't mean this in a political or intellectual way, it's almost anti-television in its pace.
Nowhere Man went into the testing and exploded. It went through the roof, and you could see it. The guy who conducted the testing came back, and just the look on his face, he said, I'd rarely seen anything like this in my career.
Do you know my name?
Yeah. You told the police it was Thomas Vale.
Have you ever heard that name?
But what you're going forward with is not the standard product that the affiliates, the advertisers, and the executives are used to dealing with. Here we're into this whole uncharted territory where there's this whole mythopoetic kind of level to this show. You know, who is this guy? His whole identity's been taken away. Why, his wife what's her story? What was that marriage all about? There's more questions and uncertainty by far. And then you have to become more literal-minded. Now, a show that's meant to be taken literally to begin with doesn't have this problem. And most popular fictional narratives deliver exactly what we expect them to deliver. The first thing they tell you about a character is the last thing you need to know. I guarantee you, you look at the first episode of Magnum P.I., he's not a heck of a lot different than the guy at the end of the series. So Nowhere Man goes in as a high-risk enterprise because it's going against the whole business grain. And if it doesn't capture breakthrough numbers and sustain them, then all these questions are going to start coming home to roost.
You have to remember, we're at episode 5 in production
by the time
with 4 scripts developed, and getting ready to go before these people are now descending on you with the concerns that Mike's telling you they have about the show. I would have been more than willing to make any change that UPN asked me to do. I mean, I didn't have some kind of, I'm an artiste, don't disturb my vision. Unfortunately, and again, part of that was given the nature of the show, I believe, no one could tell me what they really wanted us to do.
Because it's not like, well, give more lines to the sidekick.
Right.
You know, his dad's an interesting character.
Right.
Let's bring him in. You know, those scenes in The Office. Well, there are no scenes in The Office. There's no home base. It's not like, you know, you can go back to Rockford and his dad. And,
Right.
oh, let's bring in the Margolin character.
Right.
You know, and he's always amusing. You don't have anywhere to go because you've stripped everything away from this character that's inherent in the premise, and it's supposed to be unsettling. My job is to produce rating success and also help define, you know, what this network is going to be. It's an enormous challenge for any writer-producer to do a show by themselves, without an infrastructure, without partners. Larry was by himself, and then the show's up in Oregon, and he's down here. It seemed like it was too big. It did become a cult show, and you know, you would have loved it to have run for 5 years because that was the standard of success, of return on your efforts that existed in the industry at that time. Now you're seeing with things like Family Guy and who knows what else, that there can be another life on DVD and home video. So it was an incredible experience and a bittersweet one in many ways. But it will be really interesting now, after the passage of time, to look at these episodes as the arc of a story, as the, you know, chapters in a story that kind of hang together and form a whole, in a way that in, you know, its original incarnation, you wouldn't have had the distance to look at it quite that way.
One final thing, because I never had the opportunity, and it's what, 11, 12 years later, just to say thank you.
You're welcome.